Hello and welcome to Channel 2S. I'm your host, Second Soundwave, and I like Gundam Universe. This was an action figure line that Bandai started back over the summer that's more affordable than Robot Damashi, but better quality than a lot of the Shokugan lines and candy toys they'd already made. These figures were meant to hit a similar target audience to stuff like Marvel Legends, Star Wars Black Series, Transformers Generations, etc, etc, etc. They're that kind of action figure. 6 inches tall, decent articulation, good sculpting and detail, fairly tough durable plastic. They're basically really sturdy, nice looking Gundam toys. And after months of waiting, the second wave of the line has finally been released, so it's time to take a look at Gundam Universe Wave 2. But before that, we gotta thank the sponsor that made this possible, New Type HQ. New Type HQ is a US-based Gunpla store where you can get your kits, paints, and supplies. They have a huge selection of stuff, basically everything you need to do the Gunpla hobby. They do also carry the Gundam Universe figures as well, and if you follow the link in the description below and use code CHANNEL2S, you will get 10% off your first order. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at Gundam Universe Wave 2. The second wave of Gundam Universe consists of 3 figures: GU-04 Gundam Barbatos, GU-05 Gundam Banshee, and GU-06 Gundam Deathscythe. I always like to start by showing off the very cool illustration they have on the front here, a very awesome bit of box art of the Gundam Barbatos swinging his mace. Just above that you got a window where you can see the figure inside and his questionable proportions. Side of the box has a picture of the figure, and then there's a whole bunch of information on the back. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time dwelling on this. If there's anything here you want to read or look a little bit closer at, you can go ahead and pause the video. And here is the Banshee. You can see the figure inside, that awesome box art, and all the information on the back. Again, if there's something you want to take a better look at, go ahead and pause the video whenever. And finally, we have what I can already tell is going to be the best figure out of this wave, and that is the Gundam Deathscythe with his awesome dynamic box art. I'm going to actually turn this to the side a little bit so you can see how it kind of wraps around the corner there. And actually, I'll do that with the other two too, because the kind of cool thing with this art is it kind of wraps around the corner. So I'll give you a good look at that so you can see how that looks. Although I guess with the Barbatos, it's kind of unimpressive because it's literally just the tail a little bit on the end of his mace. All right, let's get these open. Okay, so when I took the Barbatos out of the packaging, there were a couple extra loose pieces in the box, and I pretty quickly realized that that was actually because one of his leg thruster mechanisms somehow self-disassembled in the packaging. Now, these are just little basic peg and holes, so I'm assuming this goes right back together. Even if this does go back together easily enough, it's the kind of quality control screw-up that a figure like this really shouldn't have. So I have had Barbatos out of the packaging for less than a minute, and not only did his leg fall apart, but I also found this to be the most troublesome figure to assemble out of all of them. Now, most if not all the figures I've reviewed so far have required some minor amount of assembly, just due to the nature of the packaging mostly. However, getting the back flap on this figure was not pleasant. The peg that it's attached to flares out at the top, and the piece itself is made out of a soft-ish, sort of rubbery plastic. So what you're basically supposed to do is smush it down on top of that peg, but then basically everything on the other side of the figure is extremely hard, extremely sharp, and pointy pieces of plastic. It did eventually go on, but it took a lot of force. And as for the design of the figure itself, well, I don't think I'm in a minority when I say this looks pretty bad. The worst aspect of the redesign by far has to be the shoulders. There's really no reason they need to be that big. Some areas of modification in this kit I understand because the Barbatos is a very thin, spindly, lanky mobile suit, and that doesn't always translate well to this kind of figure. But the shoulders aren't structural. There's really no reason for them to be this big. The last wave of Gundam Universe did make a few slightly weird choices in the name of styling, but out of everything we've seen so far, this has to be the weirdest. The Gundam Barbatos only comes with 2 sets of hands. He has a pair of weapon-holding hands that he's holding at the moment, and then he also comes with a pair of closed fists. So the first weapon you get is the katana that I seem to remember Barbatos only using a couple times, but for some reason it's packed with every single version of the kit. This is a very simple piece of solid gray plastic, but can't really fault it for that since that is show accurate. The sculpting seems to be quite nice as well, and to be honest, I'm not sure how you're supposed to get this into his hand without completely destroying it. I'm not a fan of this weapon at all, so I'm not going to risk breaking his hand trying to get this thing in. You know what? Let's just move on to the mace. This is the mace. He comes with the mace. It looks really cool. It's like a spikier, more jagged version of his mace from the show. Unlike the main body of the kit, I think this is actually a really cool redesign. Now, because of the size of this thing, it is pretty heavy at the tip, so I'm not sure how well he's going to be able to hold this. You know what? Let's just put it in his hand and find out. This goes in a lot smoother than that sword did. There is a thick area up here on the handle that gives him a little bit of better grip. There are a lot of Zaku Heathawks that could use that feature. So here is Barbatos in a little bit of an action pose with his most iconic weapon. Now, the articulation on this kit is mostly the same as the others I've already talked about, so I'm not going to go over it. He does not possess a lot of those extra bits of articulation that the high grade had, such as those very cool ankles. The ankle mechanism of the original high grade is still kind of sculpted into the plastic here. However, the joint itself is just a regular ball joint, so you're not going to be getting those 90-degree splits. The biggest problem I noticed when I was posing this kit was simply that this model is so much more jagged and pointy than the others that it kind of hurts to handle this thing. There are a lot of sharp edges here, and this is where the hard plastic and sharp edges featured on the Gundam Universe figures really become apparent. You're probably not going to hurt yourself on the Wing Gundam or the RX-78, but this Barbatos definitely has given me a couple sore fingers. Overall, I'm going to have to say the Barbatos is not that great. Now, is he worse than the Unicorn Gundam from Wave 1? I would say yes, because the Unicorn Gundam's only real problems were some mild quality control issues with the joint tightness and his weird 45-degree angled wrists. That aside, he was pretty much on par with the other figures in his wave. Barbatos, though, I think he's going to be sitting at the bottom for the rest of this line. He isn't completely awful, but I doubt the line's going to do much worse than this. Oh, and just like all the other figures in Wave 1, he does come with a little clip connector that you can use to attach him with Tamashii stage. Alright guys, so here comes the shocker. The Gundam Universe Banshee is actually pretty cool. Now, when I reviewed Wave 1, I ranked the Unicorn Gundam the lowest out of the three. Not only did my figure have some quality control issues that made the joints a lot looser than they should have been, but I was also not a huge fan of some aspects of the redesign, and more importantly, his wrists were, for some reason, permanently bent at a 45-degree angle, which made him holding his gun look really, really weird. And because of this, I was honestly not expecting the Banshee to be much of anything at all. I was kind of going to dismiss this figure completely and only talk about it for maybe a minute or two. But no, this is actually a really good improvement to the Unicorn. Now, first of all, as is the nature of figures with FEQC, the quality control on this figure is actually a lot better than the quality control on my Unicorn. This guy's joints are nice and tight, and he doesn't feel nearly as floppy and unstable. That said though, if there's this much variation between two figures that have the same mold, there's definitely this much variation throughout the line. So it would not surprise me if your experience with this figure or any of the others varies quite a bit. However, we gotta talk about the changes they made to the Banshee because this looks good. Now, first of all, we have the iconic Banshee upgrades such as the arm cannon and the arm claw that have names that are just letters that I don't feel like blurting out right now because I don't memorize that kind of crap. And then he has his new V-fin with the horn coming out of the middle. It's a pretty awesome design. The angular aggressiveness of the redesign really works in the Banshee's favor, and intentionally or not, the arm weapons actually fix the biggest problem I had with the Unicorn, because Banshee's hands don't matter. In fact, the right arm doesn't even have a hand, and the hand on the left side is so far buried inside the claw you can barely see it anyways. Speaking of the claw, we do have an extra little bit of articulation here. I don't think the Banshee's claw was ever supposed to open that wide, but hey, the figure can do it. That aside, the articulation on this is exactly the same as the Unicorn since it's pretty much the same mold. For accessories, you do get the beam saber hilts that go over his shoulders. You get the usual stand adapter you get with all the other figures. And even though the Banshee's hand is kind of useless, you do get an open hand to replace it. What kind of did surprise me, because I don't usually think of the beam sabers when I think of the Banshee, is they did actually still include the beam saber effect parts. Still though, if you're not sure which version of this mold you want to get, I would highly recommend the Banshee. But then again, I do really like the Banshee, so I say that about every version of the Unicorn. Alright, so now it's time to look at the coolest figure out of the set, the Deathscythe. I was really excited for this one, and to be honest, if I wasn't trying to 100% this line, I probably would have just gone for Deathscythe. Yeah, this is the best Gundam Universe figure, no contest. I don't think I need to tell you guys how awesome this figure looks, you can already see for yourselves. Now, to me, this doesn't seem as stylized as a lot of the other Universe redesigns we've gotten before, but I think that's just because the Deathscythe was already such an awesome design, they probably decided they didn't need to do much to mess with it. Out of all the figures in Wave 2, the Deathscythe is by far the most fun and the most functional. So if we're going to talk accessories, of course, we gotta talk about the beam scythe. This thing looks awesome. Just like the other beam weapons we've gotten in the line, the beam scythe effect is not translucent. However, I think it still looks just fine, and it does give the piece a little bit more of an animated look. The entire handle of the scythe is silver from head to toe. It is painted. Now, this is kind of a double-edged sword because while this does look very cool, I am a little bit concerned about paint chipping in the future. You don't have to do anything fancy to get him to hold the scythe. You just slip it right in from the bottom. Barbatos' katana could definitely take a few pointers from this. The handle is the same uniform width all the way down, meaning he can hold it at any point on the staff. And there's a hinge at the top of the scythe, allowing you to straighten the blade forward and turn it into a more classic polearm weapon. Now, I wasn't sure how good this would look without a dedicated straightened out beam saber effect for this form, but it actually looks pretty cool with the curved scythe piece. Now, unfortunately, there is no way to store the scythe on his back. However, with a Deathscythe figure, if you're not displaying him with the scythe in his hand, you're doing something very wrong. Coming around to the other arm on the figure, we can see his signature shield shooty cool weapon thing that I don't know the name of, but it looks cool and I've always liked it. Now, for some reason, my figure does have this weird oily substance all over these claws, and I'm not really sure what's up with that. There is a bit of a mechanism going on in here that allows them to open, so maybe it's just lubrication for that. The two silver blades on the shield are attached together with a sort of gear mechanism. However, it's not that strong, and if you're opening up the blade, I would recommend just pulling them out separately anyways, because the gears aren't really that secure. It feels like it was definitely designed so they could open up both sides by just pulling on one, but due to the amount of friction between the parts, I wouldn't recommend it. When the shield is open, you can take this little beam effect piece, and I'm sure you all know where this is going. You stick it in here, there's a little round C-clip it clips around, and there you go. I don't think there should be any mystery to you guys now as to why I consider this to be the highlight of the wave. Regarding the remainder of his accessories, he does come with the same weapon holding hands and fists we saw with the other two figures in this wave. Now, an added bonus of the Wave 2 figures I didn't think about until just now is because none of these have ranged weapons that they hold in their hands, it means all of their hands are properly sculpted to hold beam sabers without this weird trigger finger sticking out in the middle of nowhere. That was kind of a weird thing they had going on with the Wing Gundam and the RX-78, and actually the Unicorn as well. So it's nice to see that even if it was just an incidental result of the designs they chose for Wave 2, they did kind of amend that. And finally, in case I hadn't mentioned already, you do get the same little stand clipped adapter that you got with all the other figures. Don't think that should be a surprise at this point, and that's about it. And the last thing I'm going to mention about the Deathscythe is that while its articulation is 99% identical to the other figures in the wave, if I remove his scythe from his hand here so I can give you guys a better look at it, he does seem to have a little bit more elbow articulation. The other figures in the series kind of stop at around 90 degrees, but for Deathscythe it seems like they splurged a little bit and gave him a few extra degrees of articulation at the elbow. And in the case of this particular figure, that's probably just to make it easier to do some of those scythe poses. And while it is kind of a bummer that the other figures in the line are stuck at 90 degrees, I do appreciate that they made an exception for the figure that they knew people would want to do a lot of dynamic poses with. So I'm definitely going to give Tamashii Nations props for that. And finally, here is Deathscythe alongside the Wing Gundam so you can see just how cool these two figures look together. I gotta say, I really do like the Wing Gundam redesign. I like how the Deathscythe figure looks, and I really like how these two look together. And all 5 Gundams have been confirmed for this line, so it's only a matter of time until the whole Operation Meteor team is back together again. And I'd show these guys next to their high-grade counterparts, but unlike Wave 1, I actually don't have any of the high grades or real grades for these figures. Long story short is these are a lot taller and they will not fit in. They're also too short to fit in with 1/100 scale models, meaning these figures really are meant to stand on their own. And that is pretty much Gundam Universe Wave 2. Now, on the whole, I was expecting this wave to be a lot weaker than Wave 1, with Deathscythe being the only real highlight. However, I was surprised by Banshee being much better than I expected. Now, Barbatos is still the easiest pass out of the line so far, but the other two figures in this wave, definitely worth picking up. So I was going to show you guys kind of a ranked list of all the figures from worst to best. However, I couldn't get them all in frame, so I'm showing you with the boxes instead. On the left side, we have the worst. On the right side, we have the best. These two are noticeably worse than everything from here on out, so there is a little bit of a divide right between here. And to be totally honest, the Wing Gundam and the RX-78 are virtually interchangeable. I just like the RX-78 just a tiny little bit more. But when it comes to the best figure in the line, Deathscythe easily takes the gold. Having the first two waves in hand, I am still a big fan of Gundam Universe. I know there's a lot of people out here that are going to be triggered by the fact that there's Gundam merchandise out there that isn't buildable model kits, but let's face it guys, not everyone likes Gunpla. You might not like it, but it's a fact. They're really good quality for the price, which is a lot more affordable than lines like Robot Damashi. You can get these at regular retail stores all around the world, so they're a lot more accessible than other Gundam lines. And like I've said almost every time I talked about Gundam Universe, I'm just really hoping this line doesn't get canceled prematurely. Bandai does have a history of starting new figure lines and new candy toy lines and then completely dropping them after a year or two, and I'm really hoping that doesn't end up being the case with Gundam Universe. So thanks for watching this video guys, leave a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new to Channel 2S for more Gundam and Gunpla content, and as always, I'm your host, Second Soundwave, and I'll see you next time. Take care, guys.